Hi. I wanted to creep up. I didn't want to step on the music, literally. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I work here. That's why I'm at the podium. How are you doing? Yeah, that's it, just woo. Who's here for the first time ever? Wow. How did you all hear about this? Elisa. Wow, just Elisa. Okay. Not even a member of our marketing team, but you're going to get an email later, I guess. Well, that's really rad, but you're all Radio Diaries fans, right? WNYC listeners? Are there any members of WNYC in the house? Yes. Awesome. Well, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, WNYC is New York's public radio station, and the biggest source of our funding comes from you, from listeners, from people who contribute willingly to support everything that we do, including journalism on the radio, classical music on WQXR, podcasts, and live events like this one. So thank you for your support. I have one ask of you, and it is that you silence your phone if you haven't already done that. That is super simple. So in this studio, we make live radio, we make podcasts, we do theater. We're having a dance party in February, not announced yet. I just bring that up to show you the breadth of what we do. And I hope that if you came for Radio Diaries, you will love this show, but you will come back again and see us because we're here all year. And hopefully Radio Diaries will be back again. Any questions for me before we get started? Locations of the exits, bathrooms? No, we're all set? Okay, great. So then let's get on with the show. I'm going to turn it over to your host for the night, host of Notes from America, Kai Wright.
Good evening. So as announced, I'm Kai Wright. I host Notes from America, which is WNYC's Sunday evening show. But I am excited to crash this particular party because I've been working on another project that passes through Hart Island as well. Now, who here, I assume most of you, who here knows what Hart Island is already? Okay, good. So I don't have to give you a whole speech about that. It is a remarkable place. We're working on a podcast called Blind Spot, and the next series of it will be about the history of the AIDS epidemic, the early AIDS epidemic in New York City, and our reporting passed us through Hart Island, and I got to visit for the first time. And I just was so overwhelmed by the thought of all the stories that are on that island. I mean, it's 150 years it's been New York City's public cemetery, the largest public cemetery in the country. And there are so many stories there. And it was just a humbling experience to stand there and think about that. So a cool thing is that Radio Diaries has said, let's tell some of those stories. The Unmarked Graveyard, Stories from Hart Island, is, as you know, a Radio Diaries project. Radio Diaries has been, for 25 years, making stories for public radio. I suspect many of you are like me in that a Radio Diaries story was one of the first things you loved in listening to public radio. Maybe tonight you will hear one of your new favorite Radio Diaries stories. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to hear stories from the Unmarked Graveyard, stories from Hart Island, and rather than rambling on, I'm going to bring you your actual host for the night, Joe Richman, executive producer and founder of Radio Diaries.
Welcome to the Unmarked Graveyard. Thank you all for being here. So there are more than 1 million people buried on Hart Island. They're buried in mass graves. There are no headstones or plaques, so it's not always easy to know much about who they were. Hart Island is known as a place for where people are buried, where people end up because their families couldn't afford a private burial, or they couldn't be identified, or in some way they fell through the cracks, forgotten or unclaimed. But there are a lot of reasons people end up on Hart Island, and we set out to tell some of these stories, how people ended up there, the lives they lived, and the people they left behind.
Neil Harris was last seen in Inwood, New York on December 12, 2014.
Hi, Fifi. There were thousands of questions. Where's his family? Where's his people?
Uncle Caesar was estranged from our family for 40 to 50 years.
The playwright, novelist, and author of Happy Island, Miss Dawn Powell.
Holy sh**, I know that person. and it's got a name attached to it, Neil Harris Jr.
You can't help but wonder what her life has been.
I never went back, and I never looked for him again.
Annette found you, she found us, and we're here. Now we know who you are.
So just a little bit of background, Radio Diaries has been around for 25 years. We've been doing documentaries for NPR and for our podcast. And Hart Island has actually been a project that has been on our list for more than a decade. But it's just kind of sat there, not really knowing exactly how to approach this project. And originally we thought about doing a series that was sort of like audio obituaries for people who never got an obituary. That was the original idea. And as we started doing research and reporting, each story got like more complicated and involved, and they became sort of like mysteries in a way. We began to think of them as mysteries. And I actually started to think about the series as like true crime without the crime. So tonight you're going to hear 5 of those stories. There's a woman searching for the father she never knew, a well-known writer who was forgotten after her death, a man who spent every day for 2 years on a park bench on the Upper West Side, and a woman who lived for 4 decades at the Belvedere Hotel in Midtown. And this one. Hart Island is not a place many people choose to be buried, but that's exactly what Noah Krzyzewski did.
Awake. Oh, pleasure to die. Sleeping.
Noah Krzyzewski was a composer. He wrote experimental electronic music. He called it hyperrealism. He died a few years ago at the age of 75, and this piece was the last one he completed before he died.
To die. Unaware.
So Noah lived for 42 years with his husband, David Sachs, and when Noah found out that he had cancer and just a few months to live, they had to make a decision about what would happen to his body after he died. Here's David.
Nothing seemed to him more vulgar than fetishizing death with real estate. You know, a stone, a marker, a mausoleum. He just didn't want a part of it. So the idea of being buried collectively in a what they used to call a pauper's grave seemed very meaningful to him. You know, the simplicity, the anonymity, the humility, and it was on the water, which he loved. And for someone who was such an egalitarian, who believed genuinely in everyone's equality, it was the right decision for him.
So according to David, Noah wasn't religious, but he was a spiritual person. He didn't think death was necessarily the end. And while he didn't believe he would still be Noah or come back as someone else, he thought maybe he could come back as a tree or a breath. Since Noah's death, friends have often asked David if he regrets the decision, not having a traditional grave site with a marker or a plot, a place where he could visit and spend time with Noah. And David's answer is always no. Here's David again.
You know, I wake up sometimes and I see he's not in bed with me, and my first instinct is to call to him, assuming he's in the other room. And then I realize, more or less quickly, that no, he's not there. And that hits you sometimes like a ton of bricks. He's not in the other room or in another city. He's not anywhere. And then, almost immediately, a more calming realization sinks in. Well, he's everywhere.
So David is in the audience tonight. I just want to acknowledge him. Could you wave? Thank you. Thank you for coming and for sharing your life with Noah, with us, and on public radio. Okay. All right. Let's bring that cello back in. We all agree on that idea? Okay. Next slide. As I mentioned at the top, many of the stories were like mysteries that we tried to figure out with a family member, and you'll hear a few of those coming up. But first, a mystery that we were never able to solve. This story is about a woman who lived in room 208 of the Belvedere Hotel, and I will introduce Radio Diaries producer Nellie Gillis to tell us more about this story.
The Belvedere Hotel is on the west side of Manhattan on 48th Street, in the heart of New York City's theater district. Many of its guests come here to see the sights, taking a show. But there are a few dozen people who call the Belvedere home. Decades ago, they came to New York and rented rooms there. And as the hotel changed over the years, they never left. One of them was Hisako Hasegawa, who lived a private and quiet life in room 208. The hotel staff remember her passing through the halls and the lobby on Friday mornings. She had a huge smile and would always make a point to say hello. If the bellhop Jerry was busy with a guest, she'd always wait for him to make sure that she had her moment. Here's the manager Ali and Jerry remembering Hisako.
If you wrote her a rent receipt, for example, you would magically find a hand-drawn card next day on your desk. Someone took 45 minutes to make that card.
Her handwriting was beautiful, like poetry, like, well, I don't know. I've never seen something like that. One time, I said hello, and she just waved and rushed into the elevator with a little shopping cart. So she came and gave me a letter. Hello, Jerry. I do want to apologize that I didn't get to say hello to you correctly, and it just how bad she felt. And it touched me. There's some tenants here that don't got nobody to talk to. Nobody say, have a good day, or nobody say, happy holidays. Nobody say, I love you. Nobody say, I hate you.
I always saw her alone. Alone yet happy. Perhaps to each their own. You see such a person and you can't help but wonder what her life has been.
We also wondered what her life had been, but unfortunately no one at the hotel really knew anything about her. They didn't know where she was from, they didn't know what she did for a living. The closest we came was Renee Querijero, who lives in room 207.
My name is Renee, and I live here in Belvedere Hotel. When Miss Isigo was still alive, this is where she lives, room 208, and I live in 207, across the hall. As far as the nearest neighbor, I am the only one who she talks to, and she knows my name. Doesn't say so much, except, the usual greeting, how are you, weather is nice, I'm gonna get my mail. I always play this, This is my piano, and I play it in the evening most often. She knows when I play the piano, because she hears it. She tells me, it's a good thing you played the piano last night. How nice is it? Those things, very gracious.
I got to spend some time at the Belvedere over the last couple months. Most of the apartments are small, just one room, but they have a private bathroom. There's like a tiny kitchen nook. It's the size of like a closet. And they have a few appliances, a hot plate and a fridge. But it's affordable, which is why so many of the tenants have stayed there for so long. One Friday morning in 2016, it was Jerry the bellhop who realized he hadn't seen Hisako. He asked the upper management to go up and check up on her, and sure enough, they found out that she had died in her apartment. In our research, we discovered very little about the life that she lived. We know she was born in Japan in 1934. She probably came to the US in the 1970s. And after she died at the Belvedere at the age of 82, she was buried in plot 379 on Hart Island. Thank you so much.
One of the things about living in New York City is that sometimes we get to know people, people we see every day, at the deli, in our neighborhood, people who become part of the fabric of our lives, but we don't know anything about them. This next story is about a man who became a fixture in a neighborhood park on the Upper West Side. He sat on the same bench every day for 2 years, and the residents there knew him as Stephen. But during those 2 years, he had someone many miles away looking for him, and she called him Neil. I want to bring up Radio Diaries producer Elisa Escarce, along with Susan Hurlbert and Joy Bergman. Please welcome them.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa. And so early in researching this series, I came across this story, and it immediately really struck me about this young man who had died a few years ago in Riverside Park. The police weren't able to identify him when he died, and so he was buried on Hart Island. And he had lived these two separate lives. Our two guests tonight each knew him in one of those lives. And Susan, I want to start with you. You are Neil Harris Jr.'s mom.
Yes.
When we talked, you told me about Neil's childhood, how he was a really happy and energetic little kid.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share a little bit about his early childhood and then what he was like growing up?
Growing up, he was energetic, hyperactive. He had friends who he brought home to wrestle in the house and destroy things. But he was just like a normal, hyperactive child. He thrived on video games, and...
Which you like to play together, right?
Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah, I kind of got into them, too. There were times when I'd stay up late with him, and I'd say, well, you don't have to go to school tomorrow. We can continue Super Mario Brothers. I will beat you. And I did.
And then when we talked, you told me also about how as Neil got older, his personality started to change.
Yeah.
And he eventually was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you tried to get him help, but his mental illness started to put a strain on your relationship. And then, so one day, Neil was living with you in his 20s, and then when he was, I think, 29,
29, yeah.
One day he asked you to drop him off at the train station, and he ended up disappearing. So we're going to play a clip of you talking about that moment.
He's like, I want you to drop me off at the Inwood train station. And he would sleep on the platform. When we pulled into the parking lot of the Inwood train station, he just got out, took his little backpack, threw it over his shoulder, walked away, never looked behind. And there was a cop sitting in the parking field there, and I got out. And I said, that's my son, and he wants to be here. He wants to be homeless. And the cop said to me, and it's his right. He said, but we'll check up on him. So I figured, okay, so I'll go every week. And the first time we went down, we looked, and we did see him. But he walked away from me, and I was like, Neil, wait, I just want to give you money. And he stopped, took the money, and walked away. And that was the last time I saw him.
My name is Joy Bergman, and I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And this is my dog, JJ. JJ, let's go. Every day, JJ and I are in Riverside Park. This is the bench where we would see Stephen in all weather, all times of day. He'd always be sitting bolt upright on the bench, big canvas rucksack at his feet, same clothes, same facial expression. Yeah, JJ, you remember Stephen.
So Joy, you were one of the neighbors on the Upper West Side who started noticing this young man who called himself Stephen in 2015 or so. He became a real fixture in the park. What was it about him that left such an impression on you and on your neighbors?
The absolute reliability of always seeing him in the park in the same places every single day, and his sort of Buddha-like posture and silence and serenity every single day. I would see him either up in Riverside Park near 75th Street or down by the river every single day, no matter what the weather was.
Yeah. I remember you saying that he was a reassuring presence.
Yeah. He's a big guy, and ordinarily that might be a little off-putting to someone early in the morning in the dark, but I found him just a comforting presence. He seemed to be sort of just the palace guard of the park, just kind of sitting silently, observing, didn't say a word ever, but didn't seem disturbed in any way. He just wanted to be there, calm and present.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know he left an impression on a lot of people. It wasn't just you, right?
Absolutely. Stephen, I just think he's one of those people that, as you said in the opening, you know, but you don't know. And he was a mysterious presence, but always, always there. And so you just get used to seeing him, and everyone knew who he was when he did pass away in the park. And I wrote the story about this John Doe that had passed away in the park, and I called him the young man in the maroon hoodie. And everybody knew instantly who I was talking about, and there was an outpouring of grief from the neighborhood. People put flowers on the bench where he would sit. A local church had a memorial service for him. It was just like everybody noticed this young man, and no one knew who he was exactly, but he was a welcome presence.
Yeah. What struck me so much was that even though everyone described him as being really quiet, it seemed like a number of people had these individual relationships with him where they would bring him food. You talked about bringing him your magazines.
Yeah, I rarely saw him walking around the neighborhood, but the one time I did saw him walking around, I noticed he had picked a newspaper off the edge of a garbage can, and he was looking through it with some interest. So every once in a while, I'd bring a bag of magazines that I was going to recycle, and I just kind of set them there, and he would kind of give me a little look and a nod, but no words were ever exchanged, and then I'd go away, and then I'd see him look through there. So it was just sort of an exchange of friendly pleasantries and being neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple years after he appeared in the park, Neil died unexpectedly. He was only 32. His body was found by a security guard, or the head of security at a nearby condo building. And Joy, you wrote about his death. But even though many people in the neighborhood knew Stephen and had these personal relationships with him, they knew almost nothing. You knew almost nothing about his background. People didn't know a last name.
No, I had no idea. And he never said a word around me. A couple of the more gregarious, I guess, park goers got him to speak a few words, and they called himself Stephen and told him, you know, I'm from Long Island. But I never heard him speak, so I wasn't even sure if he might have a hearing disability or maybe didn't speak English. I had never heard him speak once in 2 years of seeing him every single day.
Yeah. And I think that this story is, up until this point, there's a lot of stories on Hart Island that are similar to this. But then this story took a pretty unusual turn in that, so a year and a half after Stephen was buried, a journalist and friend, Jessica Brockington, who also knew Stephen from walking her dogs in the park, she was looking through a missing persons database for a different project and stumbled on a photo of him. But then that photo was next to a name that she didn't recognize, which was Neil Harris Jr. And Susan, you had been looking for Neil for a few years at that point and posting information about him all over social media.
Religiously.
Yeah. And so Jessica was able to reach out to you and contact you. And here's a clip. We're going to play a clip of the two of you remembering your first conversation.
And she called me and she said, okay, so there's this guy that's been sitting in Riverside Park. And I'm like, Riverside Park? Where is that? She said, in Manhattan. It's on the west side. I'm like, are you kidding me? Neil would never. He was petrified of the city. So she said, who's Neil? Then she's like, oh, that's right, I keep forgetting. She said,
I know this guy is Stephen. That's what he called himself, right?
And I'm like, Stephen? She said, yeah, I'm just going to tell you what I got from him. She said, I would walk through the park, I have 2 dogs. And they would immediately run to him.
And he just reached down and started petting them and kind of smiled and wasn't necessarily smiling at me, but was focused on the dogs.
And I'm like, that's got to be Neil. And then I'm like arguing within my own head, you know, saying no, no, no. And then saying maybe, no, 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 no.
And then I sent her the medical examiner's photo of her son after his autopsy.
And the picture came up. He was more like disheveled. I could tell like he hadn't shaven in a while. But I know my son. And I knew as soon as I saw that picture that was my son. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath.
Susan, what was it like to get that call and to find out for the first time what had happened to Neil?
Today I want to say it was, you know, like a relief, but not a relief. It was devastating. It was like, what do you mean? You know, I couldn't grasp it. That phone call was like the best because I met Jessica and we became good friends, but the worst because of the news.
Yeah. When you had been looking for those 4 years, what did you imagine might have happened to him?
I couldn't imagine. I mean, it was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. He never left Long Island. We took him to the city twice. We took him to see the Christmas tree, and he hated the city. It's too many people. I can't stand this. We have to go home. I don't like it. He was claustrophobic. We left right away. Just look at the tree, Neil. No, I don't want to look at the tree. Got back in the car, and off we went. We came back again for a wrestling event. Had to sit all the way in the back. Our seats were up front. I paid good money for these seats. We had to stand in the back by the exit door because he was like, you know, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
We couldn't get out of there fast enough and get home.
But it seems like there was something about Riverside Park that called to him. Or
what I heard was somebody brought him there, a friend or something brought him there. And then when the weather got bad, they called in a crisis unit, and the crisis unit came and asked them both, you know, let us help you, let us take you in and whatever. And the other person said, okay, fine, and took off. And Neil said, no.
So a little while after you and Jessica connected, the community that Joy is part of, that knew Neil from Riverside Park, decided to hold a memorial for him at a local church. Let's hear a clip of that.
I walked in and looking at all these people, I'm like, I don't know these people. Neil didn't know these people. And I said it to my sister. I said, you know, Neil didn't know them. And she looked at me and she said, well, obviously he did. Listen to what they're saying.
I talked to him at least 2-3 times a week. When I didn't see him, I'd stop and ask him, where's Steven? Because he was always there.
Children came up to me and said, oh, we knew him, we said hello to him.
It was after Neil no longer occupied this bench that we realized in the neighborhood how much he had become a part of the fabric of our lives.
And my husband nudged me and he said, get up there and say something. And I'm like, I don't know what to say.
I'm not good at this. Not good. But I have to tell you, I said it from when I first heard from Jessica. You're all angels. Every one of you. You watched over my son. You took care of him. And that was all I ever prayed for 4 years.
There are people that really, really care. Even if it's a stranger, they care. That's phenomenal. That was the only good feeling I came out of there with. Because other than that, it was not good feelings. I was hurt that I was left out of his life as his mother. I kept saying, I did something wrong. What did I do? Or what didn't I do? Everybody kept saying, well, at least now you have closure. There's no closure. I don't understand what people think when they say, well, at least now you know. I'd rather not know. I'd rather keep on looking.
Yeah. You know, when we talked, your thoughts about closure were one of the things that stayed with me the most. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. In cases of people who go missing, people talk so much about the importance of closure for families. And so it really struck me that you said, there's no closure. And I wonder now, a little while out, like how do you feel about this idea of closure now?
I still feel the same way.
Yeah.
There is no closure. Closure would be me having my son back.
Yeah.
That would be closure for me. To me, a part of me doesn't want to know. I still want to search.
Yeah.
I had hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Neil was buried on Hart Island, and I know your feelings about Hart Island evolved over time.
Yeah.
How did you feel about it initially, and how did that change?
I was devastated. I was mortified. I'm like, oh my God, mass burial, my family, they were all, you got to get them out of there. You got to do something. The city did offer to exhume the body, and, we could have put him in a family plot. And I thought about it, and I was like, Neil never knew his father. And his father is also buried on Hart Island. And I'm like, how uncanny is that? That his father, who's also Neil Harris, is buried there too. And then we came to find out that they're not too far apart. So it was like, this may have been meant to be. He's not really alone.
Yeah.
I felt like he was alone. But I wasn't sure what to do. And then I came to the conclusion he's with his father. That's where he is. And that's where I think he wanted to be. He found his father.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you, Joy, for sharing the story with us. It was such an honor to get to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Celebrity graves are some of the most beloved places in the country. Elvis Presley's burial site at Graceland draws more than 500,000 people every year. Fans leave red kisses on Marilyn Monroe's headstone in Los Angeles, and jazz lovers trek to our very own Flushing, Queens, to the grave of Louis Armstrong. There aren't many celebrities buried at Hart Island, but in one of those graves is a woman that Ernest Hemingway called his favorite living writer.
Mutual presents Author! Now we'd like you to meet our guest authors for tonight.
The playwright, novelist, and author of Happy Island, Miss Dawn Powell.
Dawn Powell looked on society when she wrote it up. She made fun of millionaires and communists. She was a very smart, tough, sarcastic woman who put all of that into her books.
When they got back there, you see, he had opened up, and there was a tea room, and it was dinner time, and they had to have the regular blue plate.
She was a truth teller. Women who pointed things out, women who observed things, women who told the truth. Those kind of women scare men.
I do think there will come a time when people will realize that she's one of America's greatest writers.
Well, Miss Powell, thank you for joining us this evening.
But after she died, Dawn Powell was really kind of forgotten.
Here's Radio Diaries producer Micah Hazel to tell you about the story of Dawn Powell.
Hi, everyone. I promise this story won't make you cry, unless you get really emotional about failed artists. So what interested me about Dawn's story is that she went from, she came to New York around the 1920s from a very small town in Ohio, and she said she wanted to be a writer, and unlike most people, she actually made it. She published over 12 novels. She was really good friends with a lot of names we all know, like Ernest Hemingway, Dorothy Parker, Gore Vidal. And she was even a finalist for a National Book Award in the 60s, which, if you were a woman back then, I'm sure we can all imagine, it's not very easy to do. And yet, she ended up, buried in an unmarked grave by the end of her life. So we were really interested in kind of untangling, how that happened, but also untangling her as kind of this enigma of a person. This was pretty hard to do because she was born in the 1800s. So naturally, a lot of her family is now dead. A lot of her works have gone out of print, and there really aren't many surviving recordings of her voice. So, her life is just really a myth. But she, like any typical writer, kept a diary for over 40 years. And it goes into a lot of her life, it goes into a lot of her emotions. And I read all of it, and it really, thank you, I heard that whistle. It was work. And it really just opened up her whole world for me. I mean, she really wrote a lot about success, about wanting more success, about wanting more money, about wanting more appreciation, and just all of these things that are really universal, I think, for artists, but also for, I think, just human beings in general. And it really made her work come alive for us. So for the story, we ended up talking to Tim Page, who's her biographer, and also really the sole reason we can still read her books today. We also talked to her great niece, Vicky, who, even though she only has a couple toddler-aged memories of Dawn, was really, really attached to her work, and kind of like my experience, just the second she opened Dawn's books, it really opened up her world for her. And we talked to Fran Lebowitz, who calls herself a Dawn Powell evangelist, and is low-key obsessed with her. Don't tell her I said that. And that really made her work come alive. So here's a clip from that story.
She came from nowhere. She was no one, all right? But she knew that she was smart enough, good enough to be very good in New York, which is the most competitive place in the world.
She met people like Dorothy Parker and Fitzgerald. She knew all of the famous writers. She was very funny, and people liked that. And she liked to drink, so she was out at taverns a lot of the evening, sleeping around and not caring what other people thought.
Had best party, had new dress, and was very drunk. Met Floyd Dell at dinner.
She started keeping a diary. It touches on her friends, it touches on sights she saw in New York, and the whole city comes alive.
I contend that a writer's business is minding other people's business.
So yeah, she was a wild girly, and she wrote all about that in her diaries, which you can see here. And naturally, it really kind of bled into her works. I mean, her characters were really ahead of their time. These are women who slept around for the job. These were women who lied and cheated for the job. These were men who lied for the job. And she talked a lot about work, but she also just talked a lot about human nature and was really kind of relentless about it. But naturally, as you can imagine, for a woman back then, wasn't necessarily appreciated. by certain critics. So even though she was surrounded by this circle of really famous writers, she never really got to their same level. You know, the way we know Hemingway, I don't think any of y'all probably would say you know John Powell. So by the end of her life, she really didn't have much money. She did not make that much sales on her books, and she kind of struggled with money for a lot of her life. And when she got intestinal cancer, she ended up dying, and her body ended up being donated to science in order to kind of avoid the cost of a burial. But because of kind of a mishap in where her body went, she ended up buried on Hart Island. So we can play a clip about that.
There are people who say, I want this when I die. This is where I want to be buried. This is the kind of gravestone I want. I think Dawn Powell was too smart and realistic to care about this. I don't think she would have cared. I just don't.
I mean, in a weird way, she might have been pleased in a funny way that the city of New York paid for her burial. She loved New York. She told the truth about New York, and I'm not sure she'd want to be anywhere else. The main memorial to Dawn Powell is in her writing.
There is really one city for everyone, just as there is one major love. New York is my city because I have an investment I can always draw on. A bottomless investment of building up an idea of New York. So no matter what happens here, I have the rock of my dreams of it that nothing can destroy.
Yeah, so that voice you heard, Tim Page, he and the Library of America kind of collaborated back in the 90s to bring some of Dawn's works back in print. So we don't have everything, you know, not everything is available to read, but she's since kind of come back. And the people who like her are a pretty small cult. The people who love her really, really love her. And what I'm kind of hoping this story does is kind of give her more of the recognition that she deserves. You know, she's kind of had some pops of fame here and there in terms of celebrities like Julia Roberts have tried to make a film of her work, Angelica Houston as well, but she's never really had her moment, which is something I think that this story can do. And in terms of Hart Island, her family, like Vicky that I just mentioned, they're okay with her being buried there. As people who you heard in the story mentioned, you know, they kind of think it's fitting for her personality. Her great niece Vicky actually said that, you know, if she could write another book, she'd probably write about that and how ironic it is. So I hope you guys enjoy that story, and I hope her work gets the joy it deserves. Thank you.
So long before we started this series, I personally have loved cemeteries. I don't know if you love cemeteries. I love walking in them. I love the feel of them. And most of all, I love that they are like a database of stories. You know, each marker with just a few words is like a tease or a suggestion of someone that we know very little about. If you look back in history, cemeteries have always been places to visit. Some of the most well-used parks in this very city were once public cemeteries, or Potter's Fields as they were known. Washington Square Park, Madison Square Park, Bryant Park. But for 150 years, Hart Island has been mostly off limits. And the city started using Hart Island as a cemetery back in 1869, and for most of that time it was managed by the city's Department of Corrections, the agency that runs jails. And in fact, the people burying bodies were often men incarcerated at Rikers Island nearby. Just 2 years ago, that all changed. The management of the island transferred from the Department of Corrections to the New York City Parks Department. So today, going to Hart Island, you have to be a family member or a close friend typically. There are 2 dates a month. If you get a spot, you show up at a dock off in City Island in Bronx, and you take a small ferry, and a guard escorts you to the site. You're not allowed to just wander around, and since these are mass graves, they put a little orange marker where they estimate your loved one might be buried. We were able to visit Hart Island by tagging along with some of the family members in our stories. And one thing that I felt, and I think this is true for pretty much everyone that we visited with, is that for a place with so much stigma, when you actually go there, it changes how you feel about it.
Oh my God, that's the island. It's crazy. There's not a lot of land for that many people to be buried. At first I thought it was eerie, but it's kind of pretty because the fog just like erases the city. It's just so beautiful. It's nicer than I thought.
That was Annette Vega, and please welcome Annette Vega. Hello. So we're going to just jump in here straight here. Let's see. Hold on. We've got a professional here. So we're just going to jump into your story. When you were 7 or 8 years old, I'm already a professional. I should speak into this thing. You found out that your father wasn't your biological father.
Right.
And at that point, you didn't seem to think that much about it, but there was a certain point where you got more and more curious, and then you basically launched a search to find out.
Yeah.
What got you more interested and more curious and feeling like you needed to find out more about who this person was?
Yeah, I just think throughout the years, as you get older, particularly in your teen years, where you're trying to find your identity, and it's, things that I would do, my mom would, oh, you remind me of your father. What's that like? She had thrown away all pictures because she had me when she was a teenager, so I didn't know what he looked like, and any mention of resemblance, there was nothing for me to refer back to except like looking in the mirror and saying, what would a guy look like, or, things like that. And so, but as I got older and I started to develop into my own person, I just really wondered, like, where's this dude at? Like, who is he? And essentially, who am I? That whole DNA stuff.
You did interview your mom for the story.
Yeah.
Let's jump in and let's hear a clip of that.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Mom.
Hi, Annette.
Hi. So, I wanted to ask you some questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. The questions are related to Angel Garcia, who's my biological father.
No kidding.
Okay. All right, Mother. So, what do you remember about him?
He was very sweet. He was good to me. He knew he was good looking. He had this cologne. Oh my God, it was the best cologne ever. He was a charmer, let me tell you. He talked about Puerto Rico, where his family came from. He talked about the future of when we got married. And
were there things about me that remind you of him?
I think you look like him a lot. You have green eyes. Well,
Green eyes.
You have very green eyes like he did.
Remember my Monte Carlo, my 6-cylinder that I would be driving fast, and you'd be like, "Oh, you remind me of your father," and I'm like,
"Oh yeah, 'cause he used to love to drive. He used to steal cars, and I think he used to steal cars just for the fun of it."
Wow.
He was a bad boy, so I guess maybe I was into bad boys. Who knows?
Aren't we all?
Oh my goodness.
So, in your search, you became like your own kind of private investigator of your own family history. You went to Puerto Rico with a friend. You requested criminal records. You signed up for Ancestry.com and did DNA tests. And I love that you found out he was in a motorcycle gang called the Chingalings, and so you went to the Chingalings clubhouse in the Bronx. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I was born and raised in the Bronx, so I had asked people, and one particular guy, a little sketchy, but he's, I'll take you over there. I know some guys. And so I went over there, and the Chingalings house is very painted black. You don't walk in front. You don't, you cross the street. And I was like, okay, I felt a little empowered because this guy was with me, although he stayed off at a distance. But so, I went over, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for my father. I'm not it. No. His name is, and I gave his nickname, which was Machu, and he had green eyes. I think he would have been around here in the 80s, and he's like, let me ask a couple people, and another person came out, and another one lady came out, and she looked like she had a rough night, month, years, and she's like, oh, I remember that guy. I remember him. Really nice guy. We were partying. I partied hard. And he helped carry me to my room, and then he covered me with a blanket. And he could have done anything, but he didn't. Really nice guy. I was like, partying, gangs, but nice guy. Very interesting.
So after decades of searching, you got a message on Ancestry.com, and you got names of relatives, and you were doing the detective work, Facebook and white pages and everything, and you were able to get in touch with someone very close to your biological father, his sister Miriam. And what was it like to find out that you had this family, to get in touch with this family for the first time, and to talk to her for the first time?
Yeah, my mom had told me she knew that he had a sister that was a year or two older, but she wasn't sure on the name. And after the ancestry match, and they gave me a name, that's when, like you said, I did the discovery and the searching. And when I first got connected and we spoke on the phone, I was very nervous when they connected the phone, and like a 3-way phone call, and she started crying hysterical. And she told me in Spanish, she said, my niece, I've been looking for you for years. Where have you been? I was so surprised. I had anticipated, as you're looking for some people, family, that there may be rejection. And the conversation was very, very emotional. It was very heartfelt. It was very welcoming. And it was full of love instant. And it was really nice. And, then trying to ask questions, and they giving me information on siblings. I had a sister. I had 4 brothers. I had, and then I was like, okay, but where's my father? Where's he? And they're like, oh, we don't know.
Yeah. You recorded a conversation with her. You visited her for the first time and recorded that, and you talked about the last time that she heard from him. Yeah. Let's hear that.
Mira, yo recibí una llamada de él. She said she received a phone call from him in the summer of 1989 that he was very sick with pneumonia and he wanted to come home.
Con mi esposo. Después yo fui a Nueva York.
Her and her husband went to New York.
Luego por muchas calles.
They walked through the streets looking for him.
Pero más nunca volví a saber de él.
But she never heard from him again. She hasn't seen him in 30 years. She said, I don't think he's alive.
So at that point, what were you thinking?
What do you mean you don't know where he is? Like, and, you know, I knew that, you know, from all the questioning, that he had been an IV drug abuser and that he had escaped prison in Puerto Rico and went to New York. And the story was that he was looking for me, I don't know, for closure. But AIDS, IV drug abuse, pneumonia, and you haven't heard from him since then? I said, he has to be dead. He has to be dead. There's like no, I don't think there's any other possibility. So I said, well, if he died in New York City, then what happened to him? Like, where would he be? So I spoke to my best friend, who was retired NYPD detective, and like, you know, what do you think about this scenario? And she was like, you remember Potter's Field? And oh yeah, it was, you know, something that I knew growing up. It was like, oh, you know, homeless people would end up there, or the unknown, or the unwanted, and that was the stigma attached to it in my youth, and you know, my perspective back then. And I was like, well, I guess that would make sense, because if he was on the run with no family to notify, you know, he had to have passed. So then that's where he would be. So more investigating.
And you did find him there.
Yeah.
You found five Angel Garcias, and you kind of narrowed it down, and you found out that he was there.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, you know, whether that was the end of your search. What did that feel like at that point, to find out that he was dead and to kind of locate him in that way?
You know, I think, and looking back, it was like, at that point, I should have been like, I don't know, disappointed, and like, okay, that's it. That's where he's at. That's the end of it. I'm never going to meet my father. And it was like, no, I need to find out. I need to prove that it's him. Request a death certificate, request an autopsy. I have to prove, not just the dates, and I have to find him. I have to find as much as I can. And not only for me, now, you know, I had an aunt and family that were expressing so much affection and sharing with me and giving me as much information. I don't know, I felt relentless in trying to get the puzzle pieces together and to explore and discover, like, what exactly happened to him, and that it was him there.
I know you said something beautiful before when we talked about how that ended one search and it opened up another. Like, you found something else you weren't looking for.
In a way, I felt like I was searching for him, the physical person, my father. Like, and I knew that if I met him, it may not be a great, okay, I know he was in gangs, bad boy, in jail, all this stuff. And I'm like, hey, he wasn't going to, and I had a dad in my life, thankfully. So, but had he survived and I met him, I would have not found him. I wouldn't have found my father, because I would have found somebody who's sick or addicted to drugs. But by discovering and meeting my family and speaking to people and speaking to my cousin, my aunt, my siblings, I kind of like discovered him. And I think that was like the best scenario, because I heard their stories about him and the good things about him, not just what he, the check marks on paper and what it looks like he was. And he was a human being. He was a person that was loved, and that he meant something, even to the lady in the Chingalings. I mean, he's like, he was a good guy. And, I had to believe that is part of who I am, that maybe, that's in my DNA, maybe a little parting, but no, no.
Well, you did finally go to Hart Island to see him, and you didn't go alone. You actually went with your brother, who you're meeting there at Hart Island for the very first time, which I love. Mm-hmm. So we're going to close your story, and this evening, tonight, with the same way that you ended your story, your audio story, with this scene of you visiting Angel at Hart Island. And as you said recently, you said it was like putting a period at the end of the novel.
Yeah.
So let's hear this.
I can't believe I'm standing here with my brother. Like, he smiles, like, he's so cute. Look at him. I'm like, it was so nice. I found out that I had a brother named Angel. I've never met him. He also didn't know where our father was.
She reached out to me and wrote me a letter telling me she was my sister. I was incarcerated. So at first I was like, what? What the hell is going on here? And she went into detail telling me who she is and how she went about finding me. So all her research had paid off.
I should be a private investigator. So yeah. Now we're gonna go see our father where he was buried.
This is weird, like nobody knew where he was at all these years.
Right there, 201, Fred 27. So this is the plot where Angel was buried. Our dad. Wow.
I was always his biggest fan, like rooting for him.
Yeah.
I must have been like 7 years old. And we went to the prison to visit him. And he took us from the visiting room to like the dormitory. He introduced us to all the dudes that was locked up with him or his friends or whatever. And he gave me like a boat made out of like wood, and that's the last time that I seen him. Well, now I know where he's buried.
The people that loved my father, whether it my brother, my aunt, my cousins, everyone talks about how he was such a good guy. I think they were afraid to tell me the bad stuff, whether it's being in a gang or in prison, being an IV drug abuser. You know, Angel was not an angel, but it's who he is. I mean, it's not a complete story without all of it. I'm putting flowers here at his grave, just planting and marking, because he's here. He's not lost.
I'm happy to see where he lays and to like tell him like, yo, Annette found you, she found us, and we here. Now we know where you are.
Annette, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Annette Vega. And I want to bring back Susan and also Kai. And we're going to open this up to a little Q&A as a close. If you have questions.
Don't ask me nothing.
And while we're gathering, I also want to say that, as I said in the beginning, it's really hard to find information about a lot of people buried there, but the reason that we were able to do this series is because of the Hart Island Project and Melinda Hunt. I think, Melinda, maybe you're here today, if you could wait. One of the stories in our series is about Melinda's work to make visiting more accessible, and also she created the Hart Island Project, this database of finding information about who's buried there. So I really recommend that you check it out. It's really an incredible resource. So thank you, Melinda.
A double thank you to Melinda, because she's also been really helpful for the project that we're working on for Hart Island. So she's out here telling these stories. So first off, Annette, I want to say you should not become a private investigator. You should get hired by Joe to be a producer or become an investigative reporter in our newsroom. That is a remarkable amount of searching. So thank you so much for that work. And so everybody, this is going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions. I'm going to get us started, but we're going to have microphones, I think, already here. So raise your hand, chime in, and ask whatever you want to hear. But Joe, you said at the beginning that this has been on Radio Diaries list for something like a decade or more. Why? What is it? What is it that Why were you stuck on this? Why couldn't you let it go?
As a subject, it's kind of the perfect intersection of everything that we do. In a way, we do these personal stories, giving people tape recorders and working with them to do stories, and we do a lot of history. And I think we're just really interested in stories that aren't told. And so the idea of people who maybe never got a shot at an obituary or being known or having a story about them in some way, sort of that anonymity was kind of a draw. And I think we were just, the reason it may have stayed on the back burner list for so long is we weren't really sure how to do it. And I think, the flip was starting to tell these stories through family members. And they're really less a story about the person buried there. They're really more a story about the storytellers, the family members, Annette and Susan and other people in the series.
Susan, when I had the opportunity to visit Hart Island, one of the things that the staff there said to us that I really thought about hearing Neil's story was that people think of this as a place of unwanted, but it's actually unknown, which is a distinction. I guess I just wanted to hear more from you about that experience when you went. And I hear you feel like he ended up a place with his father, but the place itself, did it change at all for you?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I believe we went together on the same day, and there was a fog.
Yeah.
I was just an uncanny fog, and it was absolutely beautiful, though.
Mm-hmm.
And I was petrified. I didn't want to go. I put it off. I just didn't want to go. And when we finally got there, it was just like so peaceful. It was very peaceful. The ferry ride was absolutely beautiful. Stepping on the actual island, I felt a sense of peace. A lot of peace, because there's a lot of people there, and I felt like there were a lot of people there that, with Melinda's help, their stories are being told. They're not unknown. They're not forgotten. They're people. They had lives. They have families. There's people that care about them. And the visit was beautiful. For me, with Neil is buried right by a church, so that was, that was the best thing for me. And I just found it very peaceful.
What about you, Annette? You're nodding along.
I agree. Initially, I didn't want to go just because of the stigma associated from my growing up in the Bronx. And, unknown, it's dumb, is it haunted? I'm just crazy things like that, And I tried looking at pictures, and initially had all the old buildings and just maybe some misinformation, or either way, I finally went, and I'm glad that I'm really glad that I did. It was very peaceful. It's ironic because, what we all associate with burials and cemeteries is, the tombstones, the name, the place to go visit. And we spend all this money and on statues and everything. And the morning that I went there, my dad, who raised me from when I was 2, he passed last year. So I stopped by to see him first before going to Hart Island. Mm-hmm. And, I took a picture there, and then I took a picture of Hart Island. And I printed both those pictures out, and I have them together. And initially, I was like the contrast of the tombstones and what it is. But then now, over time, it's evolved, and it's just the resting place. Mm-hmm. And it's just beautiful. One is not better than the other. It's how we pay honor to the person in every day, in memories, and talking about them, and remembering them. So the stigma, the fear it's gone.
It really does feel like a peaceful place.
Yeah,
I have the
it's
same
really
reaction.
really pretty. You hear the birds. I don't know if the fog kind of maybe
that fog was amazing.
silenced some of the sounds of the
Yeah.
city, surrounding, but it was just really pretty. I just don't know how it hasn't gotten flooded because it seems so low. And I was just like, all right, not my area. But
Not your area, that's fine. Joe, so these, for me, these stories are very classically radio diaries to me. It's what I have fallen in love with, meeting people like you guys through the radio. But I heard you say that this was a departure for you, that you felt like this project was something unlike what you had done in the past. And I'm curious, what about this was so new and more challenging than, 25 years that you've been telling exactly these kind of stories to my ear?
Well, I mean, in some ways it's that the main character is the person who's not talking, who's buried. But really, again, these aren't really, these are as much stories about the family members. The less interesting answer is really that we just, we turned this into a series. So that it wasn't like one big project about Hart Island, but it was a series of smaller stories. And I guess, they're all connected and they stand on their own. And I think Hart Island is so many different kinds of stories. And what I like about the series is that each story that we did is very different. And so I think it kind of presents not just a range of topics, but a range of styles and a range of kind of just feelings in the series. So that's one thing that I'm really proud of about the series. It's not something that we've done before.
Did you have concern at any point when you got started, like, well, what if I find people that don't want their family, they don't want me to come up and ask them to help tell this story? And did you encounter that? People who were like, I'd rather that stay buried.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, team? Did we? Of course they, I think we really easily forget all the stories that are no's and they can't do it. I mean, we definitely cast a wide net. I mean, we were looking at a lot of different kind of stories, and it was just kind of narrowing it down.
Well, I asked that really there's a production question there, but also an emotional question there. If like this is, I can imagine, the first time reaching out to either of you, being like, well, do they want to hear? Do they want my phone call?
You were both actually pretty reluctant, actually, now that
I was like, NPR, Radio Diaries, what's this?
Yeah, me
and then I worked with a doctor very closely, her and I I told her, you ever heard of NPR? She was like, and you haven't? I was like, and then I was like, sorry.
You're like, I only know it by New York Public Radio.
Anyway, and then he said, Radio Diaries. She goes, oh, yeah, I love it. And I was like, you ever heard of Joe Richman? And she's like, yeah. They want to ask me questions. And she was, and the problem? And I was like, who wants to hear what I have to say? And how do I trust these? And she was like, you absolutely have to do it. And like every day I was like, what do you think? Yes, 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 yes. And I was like, okay. So she encouraged me. I was reluctant. But then when I spoke to Joe and I spoke to Nellie, they were so reassuring. I felt like I was heard. Not just somebody just wanting a story. They helped me to bring out thoughts and feelings and that I didn't even know that I had, and it helped resolve it. And they were so gentle and respectful. So it was a really good experience. So thanks. Thanks. It was good. Yeah.
Was any part of your reluctance, and then we want to get to, it's going to be your turn after this out here. Was any part of your reluctance to actually, I mean, you were searching for your father, but that you didn't actually want to find what you were. I was so moved, Susan, by your point of part of you is you'd rather not know. And I wonder if there was any part of that for you in that.
I had already, at the time I spoke to them, it had been maybe a year or two or so. I came to terms with it, who he was, what he was. I know it's not who I am. It's just life. We all have stuff. And we all got our stuff. And it doesn't make me who I am. So there's a lot of stigma associated with AIDS. Back in the 80s, it was something embarrassing. But now I can't do the math, 30-something years later, I think we've all been educated and we're knowledgeable, and we've moved on to other terrible things. But, unfortunately, but it's, I'm okay with telling, the story, and I just didn't think anybody would care. But, but yeah, I was okay with it. I'm good with it. I know who I am, and so.
We all care. We love to hear everybody else's story. The more we can learn about ourselves through other people. Okay, who's got a question out here?
Hi. Should I stand up or do I just sit down, or does it matter?
Stand up.
Okay. Hi. So I was curious. I know that with the transfer of Hart Island to the Parks Department, I believe that there's eventually a plan to make it more accessible to the public, eventually, I think, entirely, correct?
Yeah, you're sitting right near Melinda, who actually could tell you a lot.
I love your work.
But the quick answer is that the plan is to open it up to the general public.
But I was curious, as the families, do you have any sort of suggestions you would have for Hart Island and ways they could make it more comfortable for family members and friends? What would you like to see happen to the park?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
What are you looking at me for? An answer.
Benches, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe
benches.
benches.
Yeah, yeah, that was a good one. Yeah,
And a
benches.
potty, porta potty.
Porta potty?
It's kind of cold and windy.
Can I sit down and go to the bathroom, please?
Oh, not at the same time, or maybe at the same time. I don't know.
I had said because there was no gravestones at all, and I understand why. But I said, why can't they, like, at the section, put all names on one,
Oh, yeah.
not
like
even
on the marker.
Yeah, like
The-
just
the
a marker that gives the
and have
names
it
of all,
like a brass marker.
because it is a mass burial. So just give the names of all, but just that one marker. Not, a stone on every grave, and I had thought about that. I was like, it's cold to see just a yellow stake in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, when I walked up, I was like, what is that? It was like a yellow, like a caution sign or something. And it just struck me as cold. And I thought that they maybe should put a marker. But benches, definitely.
Is there anything you don't want to happen? Anything you feel like, I really hope they don't do this?
I don't want to see it all with, like you said, all the stones, all the statues and everything. I don't want to see that. I don't, because it's so natural.
Mm-hmm.
It's very natural, very peaceful. You have nature there and everything. And yes, I don't want to see it like overcrowded, but I'd like to see something that says, oh, this is where this is,
I actually like that they put the marker. It's funny how our perspective's different, because the mass grave, I know they stacked them up and everything, but my dumb mind was like domino, like, okay, he's in a mass grave somewhere.
Right.
And we're like, no, they actually plotted out he's in number 27 and they're 3, and they measured this far distance. So you figure this distance, he's right about here. And I was like,
I saw
he's right here.
The orange marker, and I immediately thought of road construction. Those orange cones.
Yeah.
That's what hit me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is like a construction site.
Just so you know what they're talking about, when a family member visits, they kind of estimate roughly where their body might be, and they put a little
They
thing
actually
in.
know where the bodies are.
Yes,
And
I read that.
they put it where the body is. The problem is that they've been straightening out the numbered markers, and if you move those plot markers, you actually lose the grid. So there is GPS of where those were, and we need them to move them back. But in answer to your question, they're no longer using those orange stakes. They now have these yellow hearts that they use, and there are a lot more benches. This is just recently. They are planning to have a public hearing before the start of a master plan. That's so if people could participate in that, that would be helpful. The other thing is that we developed augmented reality individual grave markers that you can access on your mobile device when you visit Hart Island, in addition to navigation tools to provide a more personal experience. And we're also developing virtual reality landscape plans so that when you get to certain locations, you can see how that part of Hart Island could be restored as a natural landscape, so that to enhance this experience of the wilderness and of getting away from New York City. So that's what we're working on. But when the Parks Department will do this, we don't know. And, you know, there are budget cuts coming along. So we just need for people to reach out to their city council people and ask them to be able to visit, because Hart Island belongs to the entire city and to the taxpayers. This is your cemetery, and you have a right to visit your cemetery.
Thank you for that, Melinda. Who is next? Who else has a question? There you go.
Sorry, I have a random question about just the cemetery itself, so maybe it's you that can answer it. But like as far as like people, like it's like kind of a mass burial site, right? So like people who have been buried there that haven't been identified, because I'm sorry, I'm horrible with names, but Neil's mother, you said that you, or I think guess it was one of the friends that knew Stephen saw the picture of him, in the database. Is that how people are identified? Like if they don't have a name, or like before they bury them, do they just take a picture of their corpse and then put it in the database and that's it? And then if someone recognizes them, then you attach a name to it?
It's a national database. It's a national database, and it's only about 6% of the people buried who are unidentified, and the medical examiner holds the body for about a year. So if you're ever looking for someone, you should call the medical examiner, and you should go there and look at photos, because they keep photos of everyone who's unidentified in perpetuity. So you can go back 40 years and find someone.
In the back there.
Again, this might be a question for you, Melinda. I read a story maybe 10 years ago about a woman, I think she was a doctor, who had a miscarriage, and she worked very hard to find out that her baby, who was not viable but close to viable, had, without her permission, been buried there. And she had to fight to get, I'm just curious about how that happened.
That's Dr. Lori Grant. She herself was a licensed obstetrician and had delivered many stillbirths, and she did not know what happened to her baby for 30 years. And the thing about it is that they used to ask women to sign papers immediately after the loss of a child, and they didn't give them enough time to think about it, and most were on narcotics for pain, and so it legally wasn't right for them to be put in that situation of making a legal decision like that. But Lori was one of 8 women who petitioned the city for her right to visit her baby's grave site, and that's what led to the federal class action lawsuit securing the rights of family and friends to visit.
I think there was someone up here. I don't want you to get lost.
Yeah, I wanted to. I think it's interesting that the city, whether it's the corrections department, or the medical examiner, whoever it is, keeps track so carefully of the locations of these burial sites. I mean, it's just striking to me that, you know, when Neil Harris died, they didn't know anything about him, and took a photo in the autopsy, and as Melinda says, they kept the photo, but not only that, they kept track of where they buried him, so that when he was ultimately identified a couple of years later, they were able to, you know, specify the more or less exact location. And I'm just curious, has that been part of the Hart Island management since 1869, or is it a more recent development? And if so, what kind of animates that caretaking on the part of the city, and the respect that they're obviously showing for, you know, these deceased people?
I'm feeling like
That was
Melinda and I
Melinda.
should switch.
That was Melinda. You want me to?
Well, and then maybe before you give us the technical answer to it, I'm actually also wondering about the experience of that for both of you. Did it feel that way in the way he's describing that, like, oh wow, the city had really taken care here? Is that how you felt?
No, not at all. Because I had Neil listed on NAMIS, and he was listed as, because I now, after 4 years, I'm thinking, well, maybe he is unidentified. So I put him on that list. So why didn't they call me? Why did they wait a year? That really, to this day, just irks me.
At the memorial service, I thought the most moving part of it was when the police officer from Long Island stood up and apologized to you personally.
Yes, he did.
I thought that was extraordinary that he had taken time to drive in from Long Island on a weekend during, I think it was New York City Marathon Day.
It was, yes.
That day. And he stood up and gave you a formal apology without being asked to do so. So
Right.
I thought that was so commendable.
We
were all in tears after that.
Yes, it was very commendable, but as a mother, it still didn't make it.
Right.
It didn't feel right within. So it was like, he slipped through the cracks.
So in New York State, at every cemetery, they are required to know where every single body is. And if any cemetery does not know where a body is, it's a wrongful burial lawsuit. So it's only recently that they have started putting markers to tell people that they do know where they are. Because when I started this, they used to say, oh, they're out there, we don't really know where they are. And we really pushed hard on them not lying to people, because they need, these burials are reversible. They go back for up to 30 years. It's a fantastic service, really. And so they need to know where every single body is, because if a family member did not agree to a city burial, then the city is required for free to return that body to the family. That's the right to sepulcher that is very strong in New York State.
They did agree to exhume the body free of charge for me. They did, if I wanted to.
But you wanted him to stay there.
After giving it a lot of thought, knowing that his father is there and he wasn't so far from him and everything, I thought, he's with his father. That was the only thing that gave me peace, was that he is actually with his father, which is something he always wanted. So
we have to start wrapping up, but I guess, and maybe we can start with you, Annette. Just what would you want people who have not been to Hart Island, who don't have family there, what would you want people to know about the experience, to know about that place and the people that are there?
That it's not a dump. It's not where people who are unwanted are laid to rest. It's people with stories, with loved ones, with lives, and for various reasons they've ended up there. And it is a beautiful place, but it's a place of rest, and it's a place of peace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Susan?
I agree 100%. Everything she just said. I mean, it is very peaceful, and it should be respected as such a peaceful place, because it's not. I mean, I had horrible thoughts, but it was nothing like what I thought. Nothing.
Joe, what do you want people to walk away from this series with?
Well, I want to give a couple thank yous in a second, but first, I was just thinking about just now. Both of you have talked about closure in a different way, and that comes up a lot. This idea of coming to terms, and what you say, Susan, is just so beautiful about it not being closure and wishing you were still looking, and that the way you talk about you ended one search, but you found a family. You found all these family members.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea that we think these stories are buried and ended, but really there's other stories that come out of them.
Well, I thank you for it. You want to give some
I
thanks?
want to give a
some
couple thanks. I was actually thinking, Lily, do you want to come back and play cello over the thank yous? Maybe that would be. First, thank you. Amazing. So thank you, Susan and Annette. Also to Joy Bergman, who was here before, and David Sachs over there from our stories. Kai, thank you so much for doing this. And the wonderful folks at the Greene Space. Hit the cello anytime. Great. To Lily Gelfand, that was good timing on the cello. Thank you for up-leveling this event. Thank you to Melinda for being here, for the Hart Island Project, for your answers, just for making all of this possible, really. It's amazing. Some of the drone photos from before are also from Melinda, and also more photos from Andrew Lichtenstein. Took these beautiful photos of Hart Island. Thank you to the Radio Diaries team, Nellie Gillis, Elisa Scarce, Micah Hazel, and Lena Engelstein. To hear more stories from our series, The Unmarked Graveyard, you go to listen on NPR's All Things Considered, or go to our podcast, or website, whatever.
Wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah. And just want to say, Radio Diaries, we're a nonprofit organization. Please support us in whatever way you want. Join our newsletter. Come say hello. You can support us financially. You can just listen to our podcast, anything. I think that's all I have.
I thank you for coming out and hearing these stories. Stories are a beautiful thing, but they need ears to be received. So thanks for opening your ears and your hearts to it.